Do you remember when Boris Johnson promised us freedom? He promised that we would take back control. Well, yeah, he's delivering that freedom, he's delivering that taking back control for the billionaires, for the corporations. But for us, a whole series of new protest bills to prevent us from exercising our freedom, from exercising our civil rights, to challenge those corporations and billionaires. He takes freedom from one group and gives it to another. Worldwide now, protest is being suppressed. Governments which claim to be democracies are behaving more like dictatorships. We're seeing this all over the place, all over the so-called free world of these rich nations, be it the US, be it Australia, be it Canada. We are seeing a clampdown on people power, on protest. And it's because actually they're not really democrats. They're democrats in name only, dinos, short for dinosaurs. We tend to forget how hard our ancestors had to fight for the freedoms that we take for granted. How hard people had to fight just to get the vote. How hard they had to fight for the right to protest, for any of the civil rights which we just accept as our lot in life. And in doing so, we forget how hard we have to fight to maintain them and preserve them. Government's view of democracy is you're allowed to vote once every 5 years, and we then decide for that entire 5 years the course of the nation, whether it was in the manifesto, whether it's not in the manifesto. We presume that you've consented to everything that we're going to do because we got 43% of the vote and you didn't. That is the thinnest, narrowest, most impoverished vision of democracy you could have. For democracy to be a real proposition, it has to be a living thing which operates every day, where people make their views known, where people try to change political outcomes on a daily basis. And that requires, above all else, protest. You take away the right to protest, you take away the meaning from democracy. The government is absolutely determined to drive through every possible measure it can to ban protest in this country. It tried it first of all with the police bill, managed to get quite a lot of extremely draconian new laws through, but the House of Lords blocked some of the worst ones. So what's it gone and done? Introduced a new bill, Public Order Bill, to drive through the laws which were blocked by the House of Lords. Going to forbid people from locking on, going to massively enhance the police right to stop and search people. It's going to set up injunctions, so you basically have a named protester who's simply not allowed to protest anymore on pain of imprisonment. This is proper police state stuff. We're talking about the kind of things that dictatorships do to suppress protest, the kind of things that governments who are afraid of the people do. We know that protests work, and we know they work because governments are trying to ban them. Governments wouldn't bother if they weren't effective. And we see again and again how protests become the leverage, the bar that you insert into the political system to open up political space which wasn't there before.
What were you trying to achieve yesterday, and did you achieve your objective?
I'm on your programme talking about the most critical issue facing humanity, so I'd call that a success.
And once people get talking about an issue, and often they start talking because of the protest, then suddenly democratic space begins to open up which did not previously exist. Protest is absolutely essential for creating the space for political change. Without protest, you do not get substantial change. They say that when we protest, we're wreaking havoc, we're disrupting people's lives, and the truth is that effective protest is disruptive. Civil disobedience has always been disruptive when it has been effective. Because if people don't notice, it's not going to get any traction at all. And we've seen this with the anti-apartheid protests, we saw it with the civil rights protests, we saw it with the suffragettes, all of which we now look back to and said, yes, they were completely right to do what they did. But at the time, they were reviled in exactly the same terms as protesters today trying to protect life on Earth are being reviled. And when people look back to this age, if there are any people left to look back, if we've actually protected our life support systems, they'll know who was on the side of right and who was on the side of wrong. And they'll see governments like ours as being the villains of the piece, and the people who put their liberty on the line, sitting in the street, trying to defend our life support systems as the heroes. And I just appeal to people to try to see the bigger picture here. If you think a bit of protest is disruptive, what about the collapse of planetary systems, which is what we're looking at the moment. Earth systems reaching their tipping points, and if they pass those tipping points, the planet effectively becomes uninhabitable. That's more than a little inconvenient. It's not just that governments claim to be able to make all the decisions governing our lives for 4 or 5 years without any reference to the people. They can even govern beyond the grave by setting things up so that their worldview prevails even when the government has changed. The Supreme Court justices is a classic example of that. You can appoint these people who carry on in office for 20, 30, 40 years after your government has fallen and been replaced, and who still are implementing the policies that you like. So you, Donald Trump, can appoint these justices who are going to do really horrible things, including destroying Roe versus Wade long after you are out of office. It's just such a gross truncation of democracy. It's so obviously wrong, and it has to change. How do these Supreme Court justices, they're in office for the rest of their lives, reflect the will of the people? Plainly, they do not. And what they're doing is imposing on women in the United States the destruction of a basic right, which is the right to reproductive freedom. They're imposing that without any democratic mandate. The position of anyone on the left is going to be permanent disappointment. Not just disappointment in the Tory party or the Republican Party, but often also in the parties which claim to oppose them, the Democrats, the Labour Party, where we're just constantly seeing these mealy-mouthed responses to some of the greatest crises that we've ever faced, including the greatest predicament of all, which is our environmental crisis, where they just will not stand up for the people. They're too beholden to the billionaire press. They're too beholden to big money. Now, one person's freedom is another person's captivity. If Boris Johnson's talking about the billionaires and the corporations, which, surprise, surprise, yeah, he is, that means making us less free. For those corporations and billionaires to be free from democratic control and oversight, we have to be put back in our boxes. We have to have our freedom to protest removed. And by suppressing us and by liberating them, particularly the fossil fuel companies, Boris Johnson is helping to drive us towards environmental catastrophe. To reclaim our power, we need to reclaim our media. It's no good relying on the billionaire press to express what we, the people, and the rest of life on Earth requires to get through this century. That's why we urgently need alternative media like Double Down News. So please become a supporter. Please support Double Down on Patreon.